Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive?
Always excited to explore new knowledge.
Well, today we're going to be tackling something pretty huge, the chemistry of life, all based on this chapter our listener sent in.
Oh, that's a fascinating topic.
It really is. To think that everything about us, like literally everything, comes down to these tiny little atoms and molecules.
It's mind-boggling when you think about it.
It really is. It's like, those Lego bricks, right?
Yeah.
How do you get from these simple little blocks to these amazing structures? Except we're talking about like the building blocks of everything.
Right.
So this chapter dives right in. It's called The Building Blocks of Life. I mean, talk about an attention-grabbing title, right?
It gets right to the point.
It does. So where do we even begin with something like this?
Well, we start with the basics. Matter.
Okay.
Everything in the universe, whether it's living or non-living, is made up of matter, and matter is composed of elements. And these elements, they're like the fundamental ingredients. They're pure substances that can't be broken down any further by chemical reactions.
So like pure unadulterated.
Exactly.
Okay.
So think gold, oxygen, carbon, those are all elements.
Got it. So like the basic ingredients. But how do we go from these single elements to like a human being? Like that's a pretty big jump.
Well, that's where compounds come in.
Okay.
Compounds are formed when two or more different elements combine in a specific ratio.
Okay.
Kind of like how you combine flour, sugar, and eggs in a recipe.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah.
That recipe analogy.
Elements bond together to create these compounds with unique properties.
Okay, so sticking with the recipe analogy then, when we're talking about like the recipe of life, what are the key ingredients?
You might be surprised to learn that just 4 elements make up 96% of all living matter.
Wow, really?
Oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, and nitrogen.
Just 4.
Just 4.
That seems kind of crazy when you think about like all the different forms of life on Earth.
It really is quite remarkable, yeah.
Okay, so just 4 elements. So I guess those must be super versatile, right?
They are. They are incredibly versatile. And the way they bond and arrange themselves creates this astonishing variety of complex molecules.
Gotcha.
But of course, we can't forget about the trace elements.
Oh.
Those that are only needed in tiny amounts, but are still absolutely essential for life.
Right, like, I don't know, a pinch of salt can make all the difference in a dish, right?
Exactly.
So do you have a favorite example of a trace element?
Iodine is a great example.
Okay.
We only need a tiny bit, but without it, our thyroid gland can't function properly.
Oh, wow.
And that's why we have iodized salt, to make sure we get enough of this essential element.
So that's why, see, this is why I love these deep dives. Like, I've always wondered why, like, iodized salt was even a thing.
Right.
Okay, so we've got our basic ingredients, these elements, but what makes each element unique at, like, the atomic level?
Excellent question. And that takes us to the next section, which delves into the atomic level. Okay.
So an atom is the smallest unit of an element.
Right.
Incredibly tiny.
I bet.
Like millions could fit across the period at the end of this sentence.
Oh my God.
So to give you an idea of the scale, if an atom were the size of a football stadium, the nucleus would be like a tiny marble in the center field.
That's unbelievable.
It's incredibly small.
So what are these minuscule atoms actually made of? What's going on inside?
So each atom has a central nucleus.
Okay.
And this nucleus contains these positively charged particles called protons
Protons. Okay.
and neutral particles called neutrons.
Okay.
Now, whizzing around the nucleus are these negatively charged electrons, which are much smaller than protons and neutrons.
Okay.
And it's the number of protons that defines the element. For example, every carbon atom has 6 protons.
So it's like the proton count gives an element its ID card.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so what about the electrons? They seem pretty important too.
Oh, they are absolutely crucial.
Oh, the way electrons are arranged, especially those in the outermost shell, what we call the valence shell,
Okay,
determines how an atom interacts with other atoms.
gotcha.
And it all comes down to bonding.
Ah, so that's where those Lego bricks start to connect.
Yes, exactly.
But before we get to bonding, can we talk about isotopes for a sec? I've always been kind of curious about those. They sound a bit mysterious,
Sure.
maybe a little scary, like radioactive material.
Well, isotopes are simply different versions of the same element.
Okay.
They have the same number of protons, but a different number of neutrons.
Okay.
Some isotopes are indeed radioactive, which means their nuclei are unstable and they decay, releasing particles and energy.
So like the unpredictable members of the element family.
You could say that.
But if they're so unpredictable, how are they useful?
Well, this unpredictability, you could call it, can be incredibly useful. Radioactive isotopes are used as tracers in medicine,
Oh, okay.
like, for instance, in PET scans, which allow doctors to track processes inside the body. And they're also essential for something called radiometric dating, which is how scientists determine the age of fossils. So it gives us a glimpse into the distant past.
Wow, so these tiny little particles can help us unlock secrets of history.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. Okay, but let's get back to those electrons.
Sure.
So they're not just like randomly flying around the nucleus, right? There's got
Yeah.
to be some organization.
You're right. They are organized into different energy levels, kind of like floors in a building.
Okay, I like that.
And the farther an electron is from the nucleus, the higher its energy level.
Gotcha.
And remember those electrons in the outermost floor, the valence shell?
Yep.
They're the social butterflies of the atom, really. They determine its reactivity.
So it's like the outer layer of those Lego bricks again,
Precise.
determining what other bricks can connect.
Exactly.
I'm starting to see how it all fits together.
Great.
Okay, so I've heard of electron orbitals.
Right.
Is that like related to these shells?
Right. Yes, absolutely. So these electron orbitals, they describe the three-dimensional spaces where electrons are most likely to be found.
Okay, so we're going 3D now.
We are.
This is where things start to get really interesting.
It does. Imagine these orbitals as specific rooms within those electron floors we talked about.
Okay.
And each orbital can hold a maximum of 2 electrons.
Okay.
And it's the unpaired electrons in the valence shell, those looking for a roommate, so to speak, that drive atoms to form bonds with each other.
Okay, so we've got our atoms, they've got their tiny little rooms for electrons, and those unpaired electrons are looking to pair up. This must be where bonding comes in.
Exactly. That's where we're headed next. It's bonding time. Let's talk about how atoms hold hands, starting with covalent bonds. These bonds form when atoms share electrons to complete their valence shells.
So they're joining forces kind of like to feel more stable.
Exactly. They want to feel complete.
Atoms just want to be loved, just like us. Okay, but seriously though, are all bonds created equal? Are some stronger than others?
That's a great question. The strength of a covalent bond really depends on the atoms involved and something called their electronegativity.
Electronegativity.
Yeah, electronegativity. It's basically an atom's pull on electrons.
Okay.
The higher its electronegativity, the stronger it tugs on those shared electrons.
So it's like a game of tug of war with those electrons. What happens when one atom is way stronger than the other?
That's when we get polar covalent bonds.
Polar covalent bond.
Think of water, for example.
Okay.
Oxygen is much more electronegative than hydrogen, so it pulls those shared electrons closer to itself.
Okay.
And this creates what we call a partial negative charge on the oxygen side of the molecule and a partial positive charge on the hydrogen side.
So it's like an uneven sharing situation, right?
Precisely.
Oxygen's kind of hogging the electrons.
Exactly. And this unevenness, this polarity, is what gives water all its amazing properties, you know? It's why water is such a good solvent, why it has a high surface tension, and why it's essential for life. But not all covalent bonds are polar.
Right, right.
When two atoms have similar electronegativities, they share electrons much more equally.
Okay.
And we call those non-polar covalent bonds.
So those are the fair and square bonds. Everyone gets an equal share.
Exactly.
Okay, so we talked about covalent bonds, both the polar and the nonpolar, but what about those dramatic bonds you mentioned earlier? The ones where sharing isn't enough.
Right, right. Those are ionic bonds.
Okay.
And in these cases, the electronegativity difference between two atoms is so huge that one atom just completely steals an electron from the other.
Oh, electron theft. So what happens to the atoms after this electron heist?
They become what we call ions.
Okay.
The atom that loses an electron becomes positively charged,
Okay.
and we call that a cation. The atom that gains an electron becomes negatively charged, and that's an anion.
Cation and anion.
And opposites attract, as you know. This attraction between the oppositely charged ions, that's what forms an ionic bond.
So even after all that drama, they still end up together.
That's right.
Do you have any, like, real-world examples of ionic bonds?
Sure, table salt is a classic example. Sodium chloride, NaCl, is an ionic compound. The positively charged sodium ions are attracted to the negatively charged chloride ions,
Okay.
and they form this strong bond in this crystal structure.
Wow, so that innocent-looking salt shaker on my table is a hotbed of ionic attraction. Well, wait, I thought you said earlier that ionic bonds are strong, like in a dry crystal, but they get weaker in water.
That's right. It is interesting, isn't it? Ionic bonds are very strong in a dry crystal like salt, But when you dissolve salt in water, those water molecules, they surround and shield the ions from each other.
Okay.
And that weakens those ionic bonds.
So water's like a relationship counselor for ions,
You could say that.
giving them some
Yeah.
space. Okay, so we've covered those strong bonds, covalent ionic. But what about those weaker interactions you mentioned earlier? Like, are they always insignificant compared to those powerhouse bonds?
Not at all. Not at all. These weaker interactions, they might not be as strong individually, but they play these crucial roles in shaping large molecules.
Mm,
And they also allow molecules to interact temporarily, kind of like fleetingly.
okay.
So think of it this way. Even a single well-placed sticky note can hold a piece of paper in place, right? But a whole bunch of those sticky notes, they can hold up a poster.
I like that. So what are some examples of these sticky note interactions?
Hydrogen bonds are a perfect example.
Okay.
They form when a hydrogen atom, which carries a slight positive charge because it's in a polar covalent bond,
Right.
is attracted to a slightly negative atom in another molecule or even within the same molecule.
So like those water molecules we talked about, with their
Mhm.
partially positive hydrogens and partially negative oxygen. So it's like they're flirting with each other.
Exactly. And while individual hydrogen bonds are quite weak, their collective strength can be really significant.
Okay.
Consider DNA, for instance.
Mhm.
The two strands of that DNA double helix are held together by literally thousands upon thousands of hydrogen bonds.
Wow. So those weak bonds are holding our genetic blueprint together.
They are.
That's amazing. Okay, so what other weak interactions are there?
We can't forget about van der Waals interactions.
Van der Waals.
These are even weaker attractions that occur between atoms and molecules due to these temporary fluctuations in electron distribution.
Okay.
So even nonpolar molecules, which don't have those permanent charges like we see in polar molecules, can experience these fleeting moments of attraction.
So even those molecules without permanent charges can get in on the action.
Exactly. And while individual van der Waals interactions are incredibly weak, their cumulative effect can be surprisingly strong.
Okay.
Remember the gecko example?
Oh yeah, how geckos can climb walls.
Right.
I mean, those tiny little hairs on their feet are strong enough to support their whole body weight just from those van der Waals interactions.
That's right. It's pretty incredible. It just goes to show that those subtle interactions, the ones that are often overlooked, they're actually essential in the grand scheme of things.
Okay, I'm convinced. Those weaker players are important.
Yeah.
So we've talked about elements and atoms. We've talked about all sorts of bonding. But what about the actual structure of these molecules? Like, does it matter how those atoms are arranged? Or is it just about, as long as they're bonded, it's all good?
Absolutely. The shape of a molecule is critical.
It is.
It's determined by the arrangement of its atoms and the angles of its bonds, and that shape is crucial for its function.
Okay.
Think about it. A key only fits a specific lock because their shapes match perfectly, right?
Right.
It's not just about the ingredients, it's about how you arrange them.
It's like those baking shows, right? You can have all the same ingredients, but you can make a cake, you can make cookies. It just depends how you arrange them, how you mix them.
Precisely. And to understand how those molecular shapes arise, we need to discuss something called hybrid orbitals.
Hybrid orbitals.
Yeah, these orbitals are formed when atomic orbitals within that valence shell rearrange themselves during covalent bonding.
Okay.
Think of it like rearranging furniture in a room to accommodate those new roommates we were talking about. The space is the same, but the layout changes.
Okay, I like that. So what kind of shapes can these hybrid orbitals create?
A classic example is methane,
Yeah.
CH4.
Methane, okay.
The carbon atom in methane forms 4 identical hybrid orbitals, and they point toward the corners of a tetrahedron, which is basically a pyramid with a triangular base.
Oh, right, like those tetrahedral models they always showed us in chemistry class.
Mhm.
I always thought they looked kind of cool, but I never really understood why the shape was so important.
Well, the shape of a molecule is crucial for something called molecular recognition.
Okay.
Just like that key fitting into a lock, molecules need to fit together in order to interact.
Right.
And this is essential for countless biological processes, from enzymes binding to their substrates to hormones docking onto their receptors.
Yep.
It's all about those complementary shapes.
Wow, so the shape of a molecule is like its calling card.
You could say that.
It determines who it can interact with. That's fascinating.
It is fascinating, and it really highlights how even small changes in shape can have really significant effects.
Like what?
Well, think about opiates, like morphine, for example.
Okay.
Morphine is able to bind to our brain's endorphin receptors because its shape actually mimics the shape of our naturally occurring endorphins.
Really?
Yeah,
So it's like morphine can trick our brain into thinking it's an endorphin.
essentially.
That's both amazing and a little bit scary.
It is a striking example of how molecular shape and function are just totally intertwined.
Okay, so we've explored elements, we've explored atoms, we've talked about bonding, and we've talked about shapes. What's the final piece of this chemistry puzzle?
It's time to see those molecules in action.
Okay,
Chemical reactions are dynamic processes where bonds are broken and new ones are formed,
okay.
leading to changes in matter. Think of it like a molecular square dance.
The molecular square dance, I love that.
Atoms are constantly switching partners and forming new connections.
So in these chemical reactions, are atoms just appearing and disappearing?
Not at all. One of the fundamental laws of chemistry is that matter is conserved.
Okay,
Atoms are simply rearranged.
okay.
They're not created or destroyed.
Right, right, like that's it. Matter cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed.
Precisely. And a prime example of this transformation is photosynthesis,
Okay,
the process that fuels almost all life on Earth.
wow.
Plants take carbon dioxide and water, powered by sunlight, and they rearrange those atoms to form glucose, which is a sugar, and oxygen.
Right, right, the classic equation. Carbon dioxide plus water plus sunlight yields glucose plus oxygen.
Exactly.
And that's happening in every single leaf of every plant on Earth.
It is. It's remarkable.
That's incredible. Okay, so what happens like after the reactions happen? Is that it? Is it over?
Well, most chemical reactions are what we call reversible,
Okay.
meaning they can go in both directions. And when the rates of those forward and reverse reactions equalize, we reach what we call a state of chemical equilibrium.
So it's like back to the dance floor, right? Couples are forming and breaking up, but the overall number of couples stays pretty much the same.
Exactly. It's a dynamic state with constant changes happening at the molecular level, but the overall concentrations of reactants and products, they remain constant. It's a delicate balancing act.
Wow, my head is spinning with all these chemistry concepts. It's just like amazing to think that all this complexity, all of life really boils down to these tiny atoms interacting and bonding in these fascinating ways.
It's truly humbling when you think about it.
You know, it's like we started with this big picture of life, and then we zoomed in to those like tiny Lego bricks, and then we got all the way down to the atomic level, you know,
Right.
those protons, neutrons, electrons, all those like busy little particles just interacting to create this huge tapestry of life.
And those interactions, those bonds between atoms, whether they're strong and lasting or fleeting and subtle, they all contribute to the grand scheme of things.
You know, before we started this deep dive, I got to be honest, chemistry felt a bit abstract to me.
I can understand that.
But now I'm seeing it everywhere. Every breath I take, every bite of food I eat, even every thought I have, it's all chemistry happening.
It is.
It's like at the most fundamental level.
Exactly. Chemistry isn't just something we study in a textbook. It's the very essence of who we are and how we exist in this world. It's the foundation of life itself.
And you know what else blows my mind? The fact that we can even understand these processes, these intricate interactions at the atomic level. It's like we're unlocking the secrets of the universe.
It is quite remarkable, and this understanding opens up a world of possibilities.
Oh, yeah.
Like what? Well, if we can understand how these tiny building blocks come together to create life, imagine what we can do by manipulating those arrangements.
Okay, yeah.
Think about it.
So like designing new molecules, new medicines.
Exactly.
The possibilities are truly endless.
That is both awe-inspiring and a bit daunting, don't you think?
I agree. With this knowledge comes a huge responsibility. But it's also incredibly empowering to realize that we have the potential to shape the world around us, starting at that molecular level.
Well, I think on that note of endless possibilities and a healthy dose of responsibility, we've reached the perfect point to resurface from this deep dive into the chemistry of life.
Indeed.
What a journey.
It has been a pleasure exploring this fascinating world with you.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your insights. And to our listener, thank you so much for joining us on this adventure. We hope you've gained a newfound appreciation for the incredible world of chemistry and how it shapes every aspect of our lives. Until next time, keep asking those curious questions and keep exploring the world around you.